let's fast forward now. We got a little less than a week to go before the big game against Georgia. And I've been saying this for most of the season, and I have not changed my mind after what I saw last week, in that I believe that the SEC is just a little bit overrated this year. And I think we saw that last week with Ohio State blowing away Tennessee. And Clemson actually gave Texas a really good game. And that was a Clemson team that probably didn't really have too much of a right out of any of the teams, like Indiana, maybe even, but still, we're talking about the SEC here of being in it. And yet that was a real good game. They passed all over them, even though everybody knew that they had no running game. But that's a story for Texas, Arizona State. For Notre Dame, they're taking on a Georgia team that has won some games this year pretty ugly, including both Texas games. And the fact of the matter is, the stardom of Georgia is not there. Let's just be frank. You don't look at this Georgia team now and go, wow, that's a guy that is, I'm really worried about that guy. There's nobody. Now there's some really nice players, don't get me wrong. But there's not one of those standouts that you just say, man, this guy is just unblockable. He has to be taken care of on defense, or this guy's got to be stopped on offense. And then throw in the fact that now they're starting a young quarterback who's very talented, but is going to be, starting his first game in this type of environment. And it just also accentuates the fact that this is such a big opportunity for Notre Dame that they just have to take advantage of.
They do. I mean, that's especially when Georgia is going to have a backup quarterback in with Gunnar Stockton. And I'm sure Jed May will talk about it with you, but just from some of the chatter I've heard is maybe this is more so on the national media scale that they think that possibly that Georgia offense might be a little bit better with change of pace there under center. I haven't seen a ton of Georgia this year. I'm still doing my prep for the game. Obviously we're pretty busy on Notre Dame Saturdays. But when you look at the entire landscape of college football this year, there isn't that one true dominant team. I mean,
no.
But with that said, I know Ohio State really looked like that team against Tennessee. So I'll be curious to see what the Buckeyes do against Oregon, if they can become that team. Because I think I have a tough time saying that Ohio State and Oregon probably I think they are the two top teams in the entire playoff. But when you look at the Georgia teams of years past, we're talking about national champions. We're talking about, defenses with starting front sevens with all NFL guys. I know Georgia's secondary is exceptional this year. I know they have a Butkus Award winner and Jalen Walker, who is outstanding at linebacker,
Sure.
who Marcus Freeman talked about quite a bit in his news conference on Monday. So Georgia still has those players, but they're not the Georgia team of the past, and that gives Notre Dame a pretty big runway to accomplish something special. I think when you look at the way the playoff was seeded, you probably wanted to take Penn State's path, where they played SMU in the first round, and they were very challenged going up to State College and playing in the cold. Now they have Boise State. Obviously, Boise State has an exceptional running back, but they are at the end of the day a group of 5 team.
And by the way, SMU was a group of 5 team last year.
Yeah, right. But they overachieved quite a bit.
Sure.
And, to be frank, Indiana is pretty much was made up of a lot of group of 5 players.
That's true.
Their entire roster with James Madison. So they were a big overachiever as well. So I don't think if there was a team that Notre Dame wanted to play, I don't know if it would be Georgia, but I think they'll definitely take this Georgia team over some of the others that they've seen in the past.
Yeah, that's the point, is that I think this Georgia team would lose by 2 or 3 touchdowns to the Georgia teams from 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe even last year's team would win by 2 touchdowns against this Georgia team. But that's what makes this season so different and special because of the transfer portal and everything else that's gone on. It's just, like you said, it's a free-for-all. There's no great team. Maybe it is Ohio State, but that's what we thought in the beginning of the season. But one game just doesn't change everything. But like you said, we'll find out. I agree. I kind of think the winner of Ohio State, Oregon, especially if it's a great game, like we think it can be, should be the team to beat. That's the team that you would put your money on to win the championship. But that doesn't mean that they're not beatable. And if Notre Dame is going to get by this Georgia team, what do you think they're going to need to do specifically offensively? Is this going to be, well, we just got to keep running the ball effectively, and even if we're getting 3 or 4 yards at a time, you just keep at it, and then hopefully once or twice, Love can just break through like he did in that 99-yard run. Just make sure that he gets as many touches as possible, Leonard as well, and try not to do anything that you're not capable of doing. And I think this is going to be one of those matchups where you get to be very physical, probably 2 really good defenses going up against each other. I just be very surprised this is a high-scoring game.
Yeah, I agree with you as well. I think if I'm Notre Dame offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock, I'm talking to Al Golden about how I'm going to help that defense, and try not to put them on the field as much as possible. I mean, Notre Dame has one of the top defenses in all of college football this year, but they are really banged up on that side of the ball.
Yep.
Lost another player in Riley Mills, who's an NFL draft caliber or an NFL caliber player who will declare after this year. I'm sure we'll touch on him later, but going back to the offense, I think you want to control the time of possession. I think you want to wear that Georgia defense down by running the football, because that is Notre Dame's strength. When Marcus Freeman talks about the makeup of his program and how the identity of his program, he always talks about how they want to be an O-line and D-line driven program. Now, going into the year, those were the 2 strengths of Notre Dame's team. The D-line has been decimated by injuries. They're hanging on by a thread there. And the Notre Dame offensive line has continued to improve as the year goes on. And I think they're playing very sound football. There's a chemistry that they have up front that they certainly didn't have at the beginning of the year. And I mean, it's pretty obvious the strength of the Notre Dame offense is that rushing attack with Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, probably one of the best running back duos in all college football. And then you have your big-time weapon with Riley Leonard and his legs. Mike Denbrock didn't really have to dial Leonard up against Indiana on the ground. And I love that game plan because, I mean, of course, you're going to, empty the can, so to speak, on everything you got to win that game, but they didn't need to. So, I'm glad that they protected Riley Leonard in that environment. He's talked about a lot in the past, how he's been banged up this season. Takes him almost a week to recover because he's in so much pain. But one more thought on the Notre Dame offense and attacking Georgia. I still don't think we've seen enough from the Notre Dame passing attack. And when you look at the Georgia defense, I mentioned a little bit earlier on, I think one of their strengths is that secondary. So I don't know how much Notre Dame is going to be able to move the football in there, getting into their wide receivers. I mean, they do have some momentum in the passing game with Jordan Faison posting, I think was the best wide receiver performance of the entire season last week against Indiana. So they have that going for them. But, you pretty much just got to stick with what got you here so far. And, you sort of got to keep on relying on that until it proves you otherwise.
Yeah, we talked about that, whether or not somebody can come out of nowhere, so to speak, in the receiver spot, especially with the young guys. And I know we didn't really even talk much about Chris Mitchell. So is that somebody, I mean, or is there someone else that, and again, maybe they haven't watched the previous video, but someone in that receiver groom outside of Bo Collins, most people would know if you're into college football, and again, he's one of their veterans. But someone else, and outside of tight end, again, Mitchell Evans, we know how capable he is. Give me a guy. Is it Faison? You got Greathouse, you got Harrison, Mitchell, Thomas. And I tell you what, let's take Faison out since he had a good game. Between Greathouse, Thomas, Mitchell, and Harrison, is there someone out of those 4 that you would point to and say maybe he could have a good game?
Yeah, when you look at the four, I think Notre Dame's top two wide receivers at this point are Bo Collins and Jordan Faison. And then there's this second tier where, you mentioned the Chris Mitchells, Jaden Greathouses, Jaden Harrison. Jaden Harrison didn't really play much against Indiana, which kind of surprised me because he's pretty explosive and he can open up a lot of things in the passing game with his speed. He showed that at times this season. And, earlier in the year, he wasn't really involved, but I guess towards the kind of the end of it, end of the regular season, he really started to come on. So that's why I thought he would continue to keep on improving as the season went on. But to answer your question, when I look at probably the next pass catching option, if we're excluding Mitchell Evans, I would probably go with Jaden Greathouse. I think going into the season, it felt like Notre Dame maybe saw Jaden Greathouse as probably their best wide receiver. He had a little bit of a case of the drops earlier this year, and I wasn't sure how much Riley Leonard trusted him after he dropped a couple of key passes. But he's been great in spots as well. So I think that's the one guy that I'm continuing to look at to see if he can step up. I mean, I would love to see Jane Harrison on the field more just because I think he adds something to that Notre Dame offense that they don't have. I don't know why he doesn't play more. Going into the season, we thought Jane Harrison would have pretty big role in the offense just because of his speed. And when you look at Notre Dame, when they face these SEC teams, usually where their mismatch is in the speed department.
Yep.
But they have some speedy guys. So now I feel like I'm talking myself into Jane Harrison. But, I still think they got to really rely on Jaden Greathouse to step up if they want that passing game to take a next step.
Well, that's why I bring it up because the coaches can say what you want about it's one game at a time, but you always have to, at least a percentage of you, look ahead at the next, especially if you know who the opponent is, look ahead a little bit. And so sometimes you'll have that in your game plan for the next game is, well, and again, I'm just throwing it out there, Harrison the fit isn't here with Indiana. It's cold. It's just, no, we're running the ball and we don't have to do all that to beat Indiana. Let's hold them off for the Georgia game. And we'll hopefully lure them to sleep a little bit. And then that's when we're going to have him out there and then we're going to utilize a few plays to take advantage of his speed. Now, could be Harrison, could be someone completely different, but that's the fun of college football that you don't see enough of in the NFL. It's just because two different kind of sports is that you can see these kids that get older and older, like not just Harrison, of course, because he is already a graduate transfer, but maybe a Greathouse that they're freshmen or they're sophomores. And now all of a sudden they're at the end of the year. So they're already kind of that third year guy by the time they're into that late second year or third year, whatever it is. So you get my point. So I just always think it's interesting in college because these names do pop up in bowl games and in playoff games. And we're wondering who the heck is that guy? Well, I hope we covered it here. Okay. On defense. So look, I don't think anybody has any idea. I don't care who you are as an analyst or a fan, how this kid's going to play. Nobody knows. He doesn't even know. We'll find out when he's out on the field and he has to deal with the pressure and so forth. But let's take that out of the equation. Just what Georgia has in the running game, the offensive line, and in the receiving game. What do you think should concern Notre Dame the most?
Well, I touched on it early on that the defensive line is getting to the point where, I mean, they've been able to bend, so to speak, so far this season and be flexible with so many injuries. But I'm just wondering when the time is going to come that they ultimately just break down because they're playing without their first team and second team starting Viper, which is their weak side defensive end position. Their starting strong side defensive end, which was supposed to be a key acquisition out of the portal, RJ Oben from Duke. It's probably been below average at best this season with a couple of nice moments. So that's been a weakness. Guys like Josh Burnham and Junior Tui Halamaka, and especially the freshman Bryce Young, have really emerged and stepped up on the defensive line. But I think you would much rather in an ideal scenario have those guys as complementary players rather than relying on them to log full games worth of snaps and make big plays. But where the big concerns really come are on the interior of the defensive line, where they're already without. I mentioned Riley Mills, their starting three tech, who was an NFL draft prospect going into this year, had the chance to go to the NFL after last season, but decided to come back and improve his NFL draft stock. Then they have nose tackle Howard Cross, who was a second team All American last year, was a preseason All American this year. He's been banged up and hindered with an ankle for the latter half of the season. He battled a hamstring injury earlier in the year. He was pretty healthy against Indiana. I think he's almost back to full strength. But I don't, in an ideal scenario, I don't think you were really depending on him to, play a full workload. But he's going to have to now. So they're digging deep on the interior of the defensive line. A guy by the name of Gabriel Rubio is going to step up at three tech. Another guy that started off the year hurt, I think with a foot injury, if I recall. Then they had another guy on the defensive line, Jason Onye, who started out the year pretty well and has always been a player that we've looked for to make that next step. And I think he was in the early part of the season, but he stepped away from the team at the end of September and has not been available since. I don't think we see him returning to the program this season, if at all. So they are scraping the bottom of the barrel at defensive line. They're going to have to rely on some guys, possibly a freshman like Sean Sevillano, a true freshman that hasn't had to play any key snaps. Gabriel Rubio, another guy, Armel Mukum, who had a pretty great year, pretty solid preseason. So if I'm Georgia, that's where I'm if I'm looking at, a Notre Dame defense that has been, one of the top units of all of college football, I think that with the offensive line that they present, you start to see that as a little bit of a mismatch for Georgia, because Notre Dame's secondary, much like Georgia's secondary, is exceptional. They have, two NFL caliber corners. They have, and without a doubt, I don't even think it's a question anymore, the best safety in college football, and Xavier Watts. So that secondary is elite. And I wonder how challenged Georgia's pass game has been at times this year. So I think Notre Dame could cause some fits with a new quarterback as well. So this goes back to your theme earlier, Greg, about a low-scoring game, because I think we're going to see a lot of these teams trying to run the football and chew up clock on both sides of the ball. And I think that's where this game is going to really come down to, in the trenches. And it's really going to be up for Notre Dame to see how long they can hold up on the defensive line.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be quite the battle. And one of those games where it's going to probably come down to big calls. Does anybody get screwed by the refs, turnovers, things of that nature? Boy, turnovers could be monumental in a game like this, especially when you don't have high-powered offenses going up and down the field, passing offenses. Turnovers become that much more important. And then maybe the kicking game. And this is something that I think, as we've talked before about, Notre Dame would hope to avoid having to drive down the field, 2 minutes to go, and need a game-winning field goal to win it. So that might be that might be what keeps most Notre Dame fans up at night.
Yeah, if I'm Marcus Freeman, I'm just wondering how worried you truly are about if this game comes down to a field goal, if you're behind and you need to tie the game, or if you're down 2 points and need to win the game, what the confidence is in Mitch Jeter. Now, he did kick successfully 2 or 3 field goals against Notre Dame or against Indiana in the first round. He missed a third, but it was blocked. And I think Marcus Freeman attributed that to a low kick. Jeter also had 3 blocked earlier in the year, so that's been an issue for Notre Dame this season. So they really have to get that straightened out, because I think that's something I talked about on the last show, is that Notre Dame has not had to rely on their kicking game at all this year, but now this is when it's going to matter, especially as you mentioned, when I think possessions are going to possibly be pretty hard to come by against Georgia. So I think Mitch Jeter has his confidence back after he made that field goal. He, went down the sideline, flexing everyone, telling everyone he's back. So I think that, there was some real concern, I think, with inside that program, and maybe some, Mitch Jeter, feeling a little bit of that pressure going into the Indiana game. I think they feel much better to have him, that he made those 2 field goals. But I think Notre Dame's got to feel much better about that being in the Dome down in New
Yeah.
Orleans. Ironically enough, Blake Grupe, former Notre Dame kicker from the 2022 season, is a Saints kicker. So he's had some success for New Orleans, and I think Marcus Freeman's going to hope and pray that they can have that similar amount of success with Mitch Jeter against Georgia.